Have you ever, like, walked into a room and instantly felt this knot of anxiety in your stomach?
Oh, absolutely. Or, the opposites, like when you step through the heavy wooden doors of some massive stone cathedral,
Right.
and before you even have a chance to look around, you just feel this involuntary sense of awe. You just feel smaller somehow.
Yeah, totally. And what if I told you that those feelings aren't accidental at all?
Right.
What if I told you that an architect literally calculated those exact emotional reactions mathematically on a flat piece of paper years before the foundation was ever poured?
It is such an incredible concept to wrap your head around because, we tend to think of architecture as just concrete and steel and math.
Yeah, just materials.
Exactly. But the truth is, the emotional weight of a building, that feeling you get, it's engineered during the drawing phase, long before construction even begins.
And that is exactly what we were exploring today. And our mission today is to figure out how a basic sketch on a piece of paper transforms from, a cold geometric diagram into a living, breathing reality that you can actually feel.
And to get there, we
Yeah.
really need to understand the starting point.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. Where do they start?
Well, the text makes it very clear that when architects first learn to draw, they're essentially taught rigid mathematical rules.
Like drafting 101.
Exactly. You learn how to place a horizon line. You learn how to plot vanishing points. You learn how to make all the parallel lines converge perfectly so that the math is undeniably correct.
Right, and the text points this out. There is a massive gap between a drawing that is technically correct and a drawing that actually feels like a real space.
Oh, a huge gap, yeah.
Let's say I draw a perfectly accurate map of a city. Right. That map tells me exactly where the streets are, sure. But it tells me absolutely nothing about what that city smells like or, how loud the traffic is.
Or the vibe of the neighborhoods.
Exactly. It doesn't tell me how it feels to walk down a narrow alleyway at midnight.
So is a purely geometric architectural drawing basically like that map? Is it essentially like a mathematically perfect but totally emotionless AI-generated script, technically correct, but it lacks the human pulse?
That is a brilliant way to frame it.
Yep.
What's fascinating here is that a strictly geometric drawing proves that you know the rules of perspective. It proves you understand the math.
Right.
But it does absolutely nothing to prove that you understand how humans actually experience physical reality.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
The text actually describes this as the difference between technical correctness and spatial conviction.
Spatial conviction, I like that.
Yeah, because a drawing can be perfectly correct. All the lines go to the right vanishing points and still feel entirely flat, mechanical, and just lifeless. So how do you cross that gap then? How do you make the brain actually believe in the depth of a flat piece of paper?
By moving away from pure geometry and tapping into the psychology of human perception.
Okay, psychology.
Because depth in the real world isn't just about lines converging in the distance. We don't see vanishing points in real life.
No, we don't.
Depth is visualized through entirely different perceptual cues, and the text uses a great example of a simple corridor to explain this.
Okay, let's walk down this corridor.
Let's do it.
So let's imagine a long hallway in, like a massive corporate office building.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
If I'm just using basic geometry, I draw a square at the far end, and I draw 4 lines connecting the corners of my paper to that square. Boom, I have a tunnel.
Right, technically a tunnel.
But you're saying that's not enough to make my brain actually feel the distance?
Exactly. It looks like a shape, but it doesn't pull you in. If you want that corridor to feel infinitely deep, you have to mimic the biological reality of how our eyes actually work.
Oh, like how we physically process vision.
Yes. As you look down that long hallway, the floor tiles right at your feet, they look large and distinct, right?
Right.
But as they get further away, they need to progressively compress. The door frames on the left and the right need to appear smaller, and the space between those doors needs to tighten.
Because our brains are biologically wired to understand that visual compression as distance.
Exactly.
If the tiles didn't compress, our brain would instantly reject the illusion. It would just scream, fake.
Precisely. It would look like a weird flat pattern. And it goes beyond just the size of the objects. The distant edges at the end of the corridor, they have to lose their sharp definition.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the surfaces right in front of you, the foreground, need to get darker and have much higher contrast.
So it's not just the lines.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The drawing has to evolve to answer entirely new questions. It's no longer just asking, do these lines match up? It's asking, how does the texture of the floor actually look from 50 feet away?
Which means the architect is essentially tricking our biological hardware into seeing 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional surface.
That's exactly what they're doing.
So how exactly are they staging this illusion? Because the text talks about breaking the space down into specific layers.
Yes. To build realistic depth, the space has to unfold for us in 3 distinct zones.
Okay, 3 zones.
First, you have the foreground. This is crucial because it acts as your anchor. It's the heaviest, darkest part of the drawing.
Like what? What would be in the foreground?
It might be the sharp edge of a wall right next to you, or maybe the back of a heavy leather chair that you're standing behind. In the drawing, this area gets the thickest line weights and the absolute sharpest edges.
Right, because it gives you a place to stand. If you don't have that heavy anchor right in front of you, you'd feel like you were just, I don't know, floating in the middle of the room.
Exactly, you need gravity. Then you move into the middle ground.
Okay.
This is usually where the main subject of the drawing lives. It's the core of the visual composition, where the architect really wants you to focus most of your attention.
Makes sense.
And finally, you have the background. The background provides context. Maybe it's a distant urban skyline out the window or the far wall of a massive transit hub, right? But it purposefully does not compete for your attention.
And this introduces a concept borrowed from landscape drawing called atmospheric perspective.
Right. Yes. Atmospheric perspective.
The idea is that distant objects are drawn lighter, with softer edges, and with much less detail.
Exactly.
Well, wait, I have to push back on this for a second.
Okay, go for it.
My instinct, if I were paying an architect to design a multi-million-dollar building, would be that I want every single inch of that blueprint to be perfectly precise.
Sure, that's a common thought.
So why is the text telling architects to make the background blurry and less detailed? Doesn't that defeat the whole purpose of an accurate architectural document?
It's a very logical question, but it highlights the exact difference between a technical blueprint and a perspective drawing. A blueprint is an objective set of building instructions, but a perspective drawing is a reflection of human perception. Think about the physics of the real world. The air between you and a building a mile away, it is not empty.
Right, it's full of dust, pollen, humidity.
Pollution.
Right, pollution.
Exactly. All of those particles physically scatter the light. Because of that physical atmosphere, your eye literally cannot read the sharp details in a distant window frame.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so if an architect were to draw a skyscraper a mile away with the exact same heavy, sharp, precise lines as the coffee cup sitting on the table right in front of you, the entire drawing would violently flatten out.
Because the distant building would visually snap straight to the front of the image.
Exactly.
The brain would just say, well, it's perfectly sharp, so it must be right in my face.
You've got it. The illusion of depth would be completely destroyed. By softening the background, making it lighter and less detailed, the drawing becomes incredibly believable because it is honest about our physical and biological limitations.
It's showing us the flaw in our own vision.
Yes, it shows the space exactly the way our eyes are forced to see it.
That is fascinating. So atmospheric perspective handles the air between us and the far wall. But we can't really separate the depth of a space from the light that is actively bouncing around inside of it.
No, you can't. And the research makes a profound statement here. It says architecture isn't just built form, it is built illumination.
Built illumination.
Light is an active material. It dictates everything. It tells you instantly whether a space feels warmly enclosed and safe or dimly lit, cold, and oppressive.
And of course, where you have light, you inherently must have shadow.
Always.
And in a drawing, a shadow isn't just there to make the sketch look pretty or artistic, right? It serves a very real structural purpose.
It does massive architectural work.
Yeah.
The text actually breaks down 4 specific functions that shadows perform to help our brains understand space.
Okay, let's go through them.
The first function is that shadow clarifies geometry.
How so? Can you give an example of how a shadow explains a shape?
Sure. Think about looking at a flat drawing of a wall, and there is a rectangle drawn right in the middle of it.
Okay.
Is that rectangle a window cut into the wall? Or is it a solid balcony projecting out toward you?
Just from the lines, I have no idea.
Right, without shadow, it's impossible to tell. It's just lines on paper. But the moment the architect draws a dark shadow underneath that rectangle, your brain instantly registers the 3-dimensional geometry.
Oh, I see.
The shadow proves that the balcony is projecting outward, blocking the light.
That makes total sense. It literally forces the depth into existence.
Mhm.
What's the second function?
Creating hierarchy and focus.
Hmm.
Our eyes are naturally drawn to areas of high contrast.
Right.
So by placing dark, heavy shadows right next to bright, illuminated surfaces, the architect is essentially grabbing you by the shoulders and saying, look right here, this is the most important part of the room.
It's visual direction. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. And the third?
Enhancing atmosphere. Shadows dictate the mood and the feeling of time. Imagine a drawing of a living room with incredibly long, stretched out, angled shadows raking across the hardwood floor.
You instantly feel like it's late afternoon.
Yes.
The sun is setting. It creates this quiet, almost dramatic, contemplative mood. You don't even need a clock in the drawing to know exactly what time it is.
Exactly. The shadow tells the story. And the final function is anchoring. We mentioned the foreground acting as an anchor earlier, but shadows anchor individual objects.
Like furniture?
Yeah.
Hmm.
If you draw a chair or a table or a person without a shadow connecting them to the floor, they look like they are magically levitating in the room.
Right, just floating.
The shadow literally provides the gravity.
So light gives us geometry, mood, and gravity.
Mhm.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Okay.
Light doesn't just hit empty shapes. It hits physical materials. It hits wood, glass, concrete, brick.
Right. Materiality is huge.
And this brings up something from the text that I find incredibly counterintuitive.
Mhm.
If I sit down with a pen and I need to draw a massive brick wall, my instinct as a beginner is that I need to meticulously draw every single brick.
That is everyone's first instinct.
Right. I'd want to show every mortar line to make it look hyper-realistic.
Uh.
But the sources are telling us that doing that actually makes the drawing look much worse. Why is that?
Because it completely overwhelms the eye. If you over-render a surface, if you obsessively draw every single black on a massive wall, the overall form of the building becomes totally muddy.
Just too much data.
Exactly. It gets incredibly busy and visually distracting. The text is very clear that you should not copy every detail.
So what do you do instead? How do I know it's a brick wall if you don't draw the bricks?
You provide a visual rhythm. It's all about suggestion.
Suggestion.
Yeah. If you are drawing smooth concrete, you use clean, sharp edges and broad, smooth tonal shading. If you're drawing a timber ceiling, you just add a few lines of grain to suggest the nature of the wood. And for that brick wall, you just lay down a subtle, modular rhythm in a few key places.
It sounds like drawing brick is less about painting every individual brick,
Yeah.
and more about laying down a visual drum beat.
A drum beat, yes.
Like you give the viewer's brain just enough of the rhythm, and the brain is smart enough to fill in the rest of the wall automatically.
That is a perfect analogy. The brain inherently wants to complete the pattern. By exercising restraint, the architect actually adds to the realism of the drawing.
Wow.
You give the viewer just enough information to feel the material nature of the wall without, yelling it at them.
Okay, let's take stock of where we are.
Okay.
We have a space with realistic depth. We have atmospheric fading giving us distance. We have light casting shadows that clarify the geometry. And we have the subtle drumbeat of textures telling us what everything is made of.
It sounds great.
It sounds like a masterpiece. But at this stage, it's still just an empty room.
It is an empty stage. And to truly interpret the architecture, we have to introduce the actors.
The people.
Yes. Buildings are not designed for disembodied eyes floating in a vacuum. They are experienced by moving, living human bodies. So an effective perspective drawing has to include people, furniture, handrails, elements that establish human scale.
Because scale completely changes the context.
Exactly.
If you just draw a massive arched doorway, I have no idea how big it is. But the second you draw a 5-foot-tall person standing next to it, suddenly I realize that door is 30 feet high.
Exactly. It instantly calibrates your understanding of the volume of the room. But introducing people does something else too. It shows how the space is meant to be utilized and what the social expectation is.
Oh, the vibe again.
Right. A drawing of a lone, seated figure reading quietly in a chapel reads completely differently than a drawing of a blurred, fast-moving crowd of commuters in a busy train station lobby.
Totally different energy.
The lines of the building might be similar, but the people dictate the energy of the space.
And the fact that people move brings us to another huge concept from the text. Sequencing.
Yes, sequencing is critical.
Because we rarely experience a building by standing perfectly still in one spot. We walk through it, we approach a door, we turn down a hallway, we pause at a window.
Architecture is inherently cinematic, and perspective drawing can imply this narrative of movement. The text focuses heavily on the idea of compression and release.
Okay, what does that actually feel like in a drawing?
Well, imagine an architect draws your viewpoint starting in a very narrow, low-ceilinged, darkly lit entryway.
Okay, so I feel compressed.
Right, you feel slightly confined, but the drawing shows that this dark tunnel opens up into a massive, brilliantly sunlit, vaulted hall.
Oh, wow.
Just looking at the drawing, you can anticipate the physical relief, the release you will feel when you finally step out of the dark tunnel and into that expansive light.
The architect is literally choreographing your physical experience.
Yes, they are directing a movie on paper.
But if it is cinematic, that implies a camera lens. And a camera doesn't look at everything at once, it focuses. The sources talk about a technique called selective focus.
Yes, and this ties right back to our conversation about the brick wall. Just like human attention in the real world, a strong architectural drawing focuses heavily on key elements and aggressively simplifies the rest.
Give me an example of that.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm looking at a drawing of a grand library.
Okay, so if the most critical, beautiful part of the architect's design is the intricate carved wooden doorway leading into the reading room, they will render that doorway with intense, sharp detail.
Every carving.
Exactly. But they might leave the bookshelves on the far wall or the trees visible through the window next to it as little more than faint abstract outlines.
Wait, if I'm looking at this drawing, and the door is incredibly detailed, but the window right next to it is practically a sketch, how do you avoid the drawing looking unfinished or like a mistake?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it doesn't look like a mistake because that is exactly how human attention actually functions.
What do you mean?
Think about it. When you are sitting in a busy cafe and you are looking intently at your friend's face across the table, what happens to the rest of the room?
Oh, it blurs out.
Right.
I know the other tables are there, I know the barista is there, but I'm not seeing them in high definition. My brain is only processing my friend's face.
Exactly. Your attention moves, it focuses sharply, and then it relaxes in the periphery. A perspective drawing has to do the exact same thing.
That makes a lot of sense.
If the architect provides equal high-definition detail on the door, the window, the floor, the ceiling, and the distant trees, it destroys the depth.
Because everything is screaming for attention.
Yes. The eye doesn't know where to look. It becomes a chaotic mess. Selective focus gives the drawing visual intelligence. It is the architect holding your hand and saying, look right here. This is the moment that matters.
It's almost manipulative.
Yeah.
But like in the best way possible.
It is.
They are intentionally guiding your eyes and your brain through the space they've invented. Which leads us to the final, and I think most profound, realization from this entire stack of research.
Let's hear it.
This selective focus, this manipulation of shadows and textures, it all means that the architect isn't just making a neutral, objective document. They are making a deeply subjective argument.
They absolutely are. Every perspective drawing is an interpretive argument about how a building should feel.
That is wild.
The text highlights a truly fascinating reality here. You can hire two different architects, tell them to draw the exact same building from the exact same physical spot, and the resulting drawings could evoke two entirely different emotional responses.
Just based on what they choose to emphasize.
Exactly.
Let's say it's a government building. How would one architect make it feel intimidating?
They could manipulate the composition. They might place the horizon line very low on the page, which simulates the viewer looking up from a low angle.
Oh, like a worm's eye view.
Right. Suddenly the building is looming over you. It emphasizes monumentality and power. It makes you feel incredibly small.
And what if the other architect wants the exact same building to feel welcoming?
They might raise the horizon line to eye level. They might frame the drawing much more tightly, ignoring the massive roof and focusing entirely on the warm light spilling out of the front doors onto a small landscaped seating area.
They've completely changed the emotional reality simply by changing the framing.
Exactly. An off-center framing can create a sense of dynamic nervous tension, while a really tight, low-ceiling crop can make a room feel intimate or, depending on the lighting, totally claustrophobic.
The drawing itself is a psychological tool.
It acts as a design critique before a single shovel hits the dirt. That is the magic of this process.
Right.
An architect can sketch a central courtyard for a new hospital, look at the shadows and the scale on the paper, and realize, oh no, this doesn't feel like a safe healing enclosure. The walls are too high, it feels like a prison yard.
And because it's just paper, they can fix it.
Yes. They change the design right then and there. It tests the architecture as an emotional reality before it becomes a built fact.
So what does this all mean? I mean, this entire deep dive really changes the definition of what an architect does. It shows that there is this profound level of emotional intelligence embedded in the profession.
Absolutely.
They aren't just calculating the load-bearing capacity of a steel beam or figuring out where the plumbing goes. They are anticipating human anxiety.
They really are.
They are calculating the emotional consequence of a shadow. They're figuring out if a threshold feels inviting or if a living room feels like a sanctuary.
It reinforces the ultimate truth of our sources today. Buildings are not just physical objects that we use. They are vessels of experience that we feel.
Vessels of experience.
Yeah, the active perspective drawing trains the architect to bridge the technical math of geometry with the sensory imagination of a lived human experience. It forces them to constantly ask, how will this light, this material, and this scale actually affect the person who walks through that door?
That is just incredible. And for you listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden language of architecture.
It's been fun.
It really has. The next time you walk into a space, whether it's a bustling train station, a quiet, dusty library, or just a DMV, take a second to really look around.
Pay attention to the space.
Yeah, architecture is so much more than concrete and geometry. It is a carefully orchestrated sequence of light, shadow, and psychological cues. Look down the hallway and notice the atmospheric fading.
Look for the vanishing points.
Yes, Look at how the shadows are anchoring the furniture to the floor. Notice how the ceiling height and the light are actively shaping your mood in that exact moment, because I promise you, none of it is an accident.
No, it really isn't. The text reveals that an architect uses drawing to test how a space will feel before it's built. So I'll leave you with this. The next time you walk into a room that makes you feel inexplicably anxious or instantly at peace, ask yourself, did the architect feel that exact same emotion on a blank piece of paper years ago? Or did they only focus on the geometry and let the emotion happen by accident?